Okay, thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Troubleshooting EDI Claims Rejections by Kirsten Burge. Sorry, Kirsten. I don't know if I'll ever get that right. Go ahead, Kirsten, and introduce yourself and then start yourself off with the presentation.
Perfect. Like Julie said, my name is Kirsten Burge. I've worked at Select Health for 13 years, and I have been in EDI for almost half of that time. So I have worked on the payer side of electronic claims for quite some time and have some expertise. And last year when they did the education fair, they sent out a survey like they always do and asked what types of topics you would be interested in. And this came back as the #1 most requested topic. And so I worked in conjunction with Sarah to make sure that we could provide something that was useful to you. I didn't want it to be solely about Select Health. I wanted it to be across all payers. Some of you may not even submit claims to Select Health. So it was important that we make sure that we could cross any sort of rejection. Julie, I think you need to be on mute. I'm sorry, I'm hearing a lot of feedback from
Okay, I will put you on mute.
Thanks. And so that is one great thing that UHIN provides for us as a value to the community. Since all the claims feeds are going through UHIN, they are able to analyze those rejections that are coming back from the payer. And so even without a payer's cooperation, we're able to include their data in this analysis. So that's what we're going to start with today. And as I was trying to come up with this presentation and I had the data from Sarah, I wasn't quite sure where to begin. And so we're just going to start with this.
Let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start.
So if this is good enough for Julie Andrews, I figured it would be good enough for the rest of us. So we'll start with the ABCs of EDI. And so I'm just going to do a high-level overview of the EDI transactions we're going to be discussing today. Now, some of you may feel like you're EDI experts, although if you are, you might not be wanting to attend this session. Some of you might be somewhere in the middle. And then some of you might be at the very beginning and you might think that this is some sort of dark magic that is getting claims electronically to the payers. So an 837 is an electronic claim, and it's a transaction that is HIPAA mandated just like a paper form. And it's going to have all the same information that a paper form would have. So it would have the patient and demographic information, what services you're providing and how much you're charging for them, the condition of the patient, all that information. But because it's not limited to the real estate of an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, you can include a lot of additional information. So one good example of this is you can send electronic coordination of benefits information as well. So there's a lot more detail, a lot more information about the providers that are servicing. You can send more information on ordering and referring providers. So this is one of the many reasons that we prefer electronic claims, because we can get additional information. Next, let's talk about a 999. So this is the electronic acknowledgment of a claim or batch of claims. So it's basically going to be the handoff, and you will get a 999 for every stop your claim makes along the way. So I liken this to a UPS tracking code. You can see, okay, my shipment originated in Atlanta, and now I can see that it's made it to Kansas, and now I can see that it's in Colorado, and it's at Salt Lake City, and now it's at my doorstep. So every single step along the way, you can get that acknowledgement to make sure that it was received. It's going to tell you if the file was accepted, rejected, or if it was accepted with errors. In addition to letting you know if there are errors in the file, it will tell you where they are and a high-level overview of the error type. Now, one thing you have to remember with these transactions is they are national standards. So the reasons that they give you aren't very specific because they have to work for a wide variety of rejects, which is part of why we're having this training, because it can be a little difficult to interpret them. So the types of errors you're going to see in a 999 are going to have to do with structure and syntax. So just like when you were in English in high school and your teacher would grade your papers and they would make sure you're using correct spelling and grammar, that you have appropriate punctuation and everything makes sense, that you have a subject and a verb, that's the type of errors that we're looking at in 999. It's a high-level overview of your syntax. So one example of a reject would be that a required or conditionally needed piece of information is missing. So if you send one thing, it means another thing is required and that second piece isn't sent. That would be a 999 reject. If something is too short or too long, so for example, a zip code can only be 5 or 9 digits. So if you sent one with 4 or 10, that would hit a 999 error. If there's an invalid character, code, value, date, or time, that would be an issue. If there's too many repetitions or components, so a great example of this is for a professional claim, which would be typically sent on a CMS paper form. For professional claims, you can only send 50 lines. And so if you sent 51 lines, that would be too many repetitions and that could hit an issue. So if you have more than 50 lines, you have to split it into 2 claims. Too few repetitions would be another issue. So using that same example, apparently UHIN receives a surprising number of claims with no procedure codes sent. So we would have to have at least 1 line. That would be a 999 reject. If not used data is sent, this can be from old versions, which is kind of going to tie into this next one. The code is not used in the version submitted. So how it works with electronic claims is that we are mandated to use a certain version. Currently, we are on 5010. Previously, we were on 4010, and we anticipate adopting 7030. So if you use something that exists in 7030 in today's version, 5010, that would hit a 999 reject because we are not mandated to use 7030 yet, and then the same would go for something that's only used in 4010. Just remember, this is just saying I accept your batch. It's kind of your handoff. And it's saying that just an acknowledgement that it was received. So you're looking for that 999 from the payer. So a 277CA, when we're talking about a batch of claims, let's say you send 100 claims to a payer and you get that 999 back. So you know all 100 claims were accepted by the payer. But now there's a typical 5 to 6% rejection rate on a 277CA. So that's meaning out of those 100 claims, 5 or 6 of those are probably going to come back to you with some sort of edit. So you know they've gotten it, but now we just need to make sure that you know which claims make it in and which claims you're going to have to work and resubmit. So this is basically like your checkbook register. It's going to let you know exactly how you can reconcile the claims that you have sent. So in this example, we have 5 claims, and patient A, C, D, and E made it through, and you will receive an ERA or an 835 or a paper remittance advice explaining how those were processed. But patient B needs some form of intervention to get that claim processed appropriately. So how a CA works is it will send you a claim status code, and I provided some common ones here. So if a claim was accepted for processing, that would obviously be a good sign. If it was a duplicate claim, if the patient wasn't eligible, or if the dependent wasn't found. I've provided a hyperlink of where you can see all the claim status codes. Hopefully your software makes those easy for you to read, but if not, you can interpret them there. You could also just type in claim status codes into a web browser and search for them and look for the X12 link. In addition to the claim status code, you're going to get a status category code. It's going to tell you if it was acknowledged, pending, if there was a request for additional information, if it was finalized, or if there was an error. So most of the most common are the A2, which is accepted for processing, so that's good. You can look for your electronic remittance advice to see how it was processed, or A3 would be returned as unprocessable. And once again, I've provided that hyperlink there for you to find those. So I'm a visual person. Most people are, and I like workflows because they help me visualize a process. So here we have you have initiated a claim through your software, and then depending on if your software connects directly to a clearinghouse or UHIN, you will go one way or the other. So if you use a clearinghouse, it's going to go through your clearinghouse scrubbing software and determine if there's any errors. And if there are, it will send you back that 99R reject to work and resubmit. If it doesn't hit any errors, then it will go to UHIN. Or if there's additional clearinghouses along the way, sometimes they hop to multiple clearinghouses, you'll get a 999 across here each way, and then it would end up in UHIN. So it's going to go through UHIN software. and look for errors. And one thing I wanted to point out here is that UHIN may be editing at a higher level than your clearinghouse because the payer has asked them to. So they may do additional edits above and beyond your clearinghouse, and that's why you could see rejections at UHIN that you don't get from your clearinghouse, because UHIN is working directly with the payer, and so they can customize that for the payer. If it makes it all the way through, then you're going to get that last 999 through your payer, and if it makes it through, we're going to go on. Otherwise, you'll resubmit. And now it's going to start looking at an individual claim-by-claim basis. So remember, we have a batch of claims that could be full of garbage, and there's two pieces of information that every payer has to be able to get to in order to process your claim. The first one is they have to identify the provider of service. So they need to be able to identify who performed the services, and they have to be able to identify the patient. If they can't do that, they can't move that claim forward. So those are our two biggest edits that we're going to see right here. Can the patient be identified? Yes. If so, it will move on. Otherwise, it will get rejected back to you. Can the provider be identified? Is the patient eligible for that date of service? A lot of payers do that edit. Is the claim a unique or non-duplicate submission? Most payers are looking back at a 90-day period of time. So if that exact same claim has been sent, they can reject it as a duplicate. Are all the diagnosis codes valid for the date of service? And is the claim clean and it doesn't hit any additional edits the payer may have in place? And if so, you're going to get a 277CA acceptance for each claim, or for the ones that are rejected, you will get a 277CA rejection. All right, so let's start with our 999 rejections. We're going to just dive right in here, and these were provided by UHIN. So the first one is an invalid code value. So once again, we can see that that is not very descriptive. It may not be helpful to you to identify what the problem is. So I'm going to provide some common examples of what would hit that edit. So the first one is a lowercase letter in the state or some other field that requires it to be in uppercase. So here we see Utah, which is a valid abbreviation, but it's in lowercase. Another example would be a letter in a numeric field. So United States zip codes are all numeric. And here we can see that someone tried to submit a Canadian address, and their zip codes are not only numeric, they're alphanumeric. So that is not going to be appropriate. This should be in an out-of-country address section. So potential fixes, you can ask your software vendor to change the field to not allow invalid lowercase characters, or typically what you'll see is even if you type it in lowercase, it will force it to uppercase. So that's a pretty easy solution for your software vendor to implement. Or they can just do it on the back end and force those fields to uppercase. Or they could put an edit on that field to not allow alpha characters. One thing that we're going to talk about a lot is how invaluable good software is to you and your office. So you need to be on a first-name basis with your software vendor, technical staff. Maybe buy them donuts, do whatever you need to be on their good graces, because they can help you quite a bit with some of the common errors. Another example, and this one is region-specific. Regents does their procedure and diagnosis code validation at a 999 level. Most payers do diagnosis code edits at a 277CA level. But this would be a common one, so we have a procedure code that's invalid there. Or this diagnosis code, for those of you that remember ICD-9, it wasn't that long ago, but this is an ICD-9 code and we are only on ICD-10, so that would be considered an invalid code for the current dates of service. So one potential fix here is a lot of software vendors or clearinghouses do have edits for procedure and diagnosis code sets. And one thing to note is that good solutions will use date of service logic in determining if it's valid. This diagnosis code here is valid for dates of service before October 1st of 2015. So it is a valid diagnosis code, just not for current dates of service. So work with them and see if they can set those kinds of edits up. And usually they can make those payer specific. So if you have a handful of payers that have an issue with a code, you can set that up in the software so that it alerts you to that problem before you send the claim. That way you have to work less edits on the back end. All right. Patient information is being sent in addition to subscriber information when the patient is a subscriber. So this could be a common issue on a Medicaid patient, for example. So here we see Harry Potter is our subscriber, and then they are also our patient. So X12 and EDI claims are all about efficiency. They don't like you to repeat information. That's why they make it a syntax issue. So your software vendor could potentially research their EDI generation. I had a provider that was having this issue, and it wasn't in the office that the problem was. It was a bug on the back end. So just make sure everything's okay there. And then if not, they can maybe build some logic based off of date of birth and name to make sure that it doesn't allow you to enter a patient in addition to the subscriber when they're the same person. The second most common 999 error is implementation dependent data element missing. So yeah, that's so helpful, isn't it? You know exactly what that means. So the most common example of this is that an unspecific procedure code is sent without a description. So here we have a ketamine injection, and that does require a note that explains what it is. So this means that the payer is going to require a description for that code. If you're not familiar with your software, reach out to your vendor and see where that information goes. There should be some form of edit box, and you can put that description. And then once again, see if there's a code that you use all the time that's getting rejected, ask them if they can put that edit in place for you. So before you even send the claim, you know, oh, this is a select health patient, and they need a description for this code. So I'm going to put it in right there, or whatever the situation is. The third most common edit is missing claim level information. So this is usually missing dates, or dates are sent when they are not needed. So there are a lot of dates that can be sent in an EDI claim. This is part of what we're talking about. There's much more data that can come to a payer. So I've provided an example of many of the dates, and I would reach out to your software vendor. If the issue is that a date is being sent that shouldn't, find out where that is if you're not able to figure it out, and see where you need to remove it. If something needs to be sent and you don't know where that goes, ask them where you would put that information. And sometimes it could just be as simple as a formatting issue. In X12, dates need to come across as year, 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 month, month, day, day. So it's a little bit backwards, and so it could just be that you're putting the dates incorrectly, but it could be formatted incorrectly when it's being sent out. Number 4, missing or invalid claim provider information. So this could be issues with your rendering provider or referring or service facility location. So here we have Dr. Chris Pine. I have to make myself a little entertained. I know this can be dry. So Chris Pine is a doctor. I can get behind that. And we have an MPI here, and that is an invalid MPI. So this would hit a 999 edit. You need to remember that referring providers are required for all diagnostic and lab services, and for DME, it needs to be reported on every single line. So if you have 5 lines, you're going to have to put that referring or ordering provider on each and every line. And rendering provider information is required when it's different from the name that is listed in the billing. So if you're doing billing for multiple providers, you usually have a billing entity. This is my office. And then you need to send the individual provider. If you're doing billing for just one person, then their name can be in the billing, and you wouldn't have to repeat that. And then you need to send the service facility location if it's different from where your office that does the billing is. And just work with your software vendor if that's not familiar to you. Hopefully this is all in just one place so you don't have to do it for every single claim. And then the last one is billing provider issues, and once again, a not very helpful description, but this is typically due to a tax ID issue. So here we have a tax ID that's a digit too long. This one is a digit too short, and this one has a character that is invalid in the tax ID. Make sure, and I'm going to sound like a broken record with a few things, and tax ID and MPI are one of them. Make sure that they are correct. Double check them. A tax ID should always be 9 digits. Valid MPIs follow an algorithm, so the first character is always a 1 or a 2, and then the last digit is determined by some math on the second through the second to the last character. So that's how they can determine if an MPI is valid or not. There are websites out there that will allow you to generate a fake NPI, but remember, any payer is going to have to be able to identify the provider of service to accept a claim. And so it doesn't do any good to get past the 999 edit if they're still not going to be able to identify them in their system. So double check your MPIs, make sure they're valid, and we shouldn't be using social security numbers unless there's just the single provider doing billing on their own. All right, so thank you for hanging with me. That's a little dry, so I think we have a celebration for making it through the 999 edit. Woo! No, we just need a little Prince to liven us up and wake us up. All right, so now we're going to move on to the 277CA rejections. The number one most common rejection is the diagnosis code. So if the diagnosis code is invalid for the date of service, we're going to have an issue. So this is a real-life example from my system. This diagnosis code termed on 9/30 of 2017, but the date of service for the claim was for 12/6 of 2017. So in addition to it maybe not being a valid diagnosis for the date of service, you need to make sure that you are sending all diagnosis codes, including the supplemental ones. And hopefully this isn't a surprise to anyone. We're on ICD-10, so you need to stop using those 9s unless you're dealing with a really hairy COB situation from 2015. That's the only way you should be using an ICD-9 code. And remember that those code sets update every year in October. So we see a surge in this rejection after October 1st. Once again, work with your software vendor. They may have some solutions that make this a little bit easier. And remember that that date of service is important. I know I've said it a few times. UHIN does check diagnosis codes to make sure they're valid, but they do not check based on date of service. So keep that in mind. All right, the second most common rejection is patient is ineligible, and that's because we have to be able to get to a valid patient to process your claim. So if the patient term before date of service or the date of service is before they're effective, you'll see this edit. So this is a redacted example. The date of service was from March 1st of 2018, and they termed in February. So the best solution I have for this is the 270-271 benefits and eligibility request and response. If you are not utilizing the 270, please reach out to your software vendor or clearinghouse and look into it. It is a very robust transaction that was mandated as a part of the ACA. So what you do is you can send this as a real-time transaction, and if you send it real-time, within 20 seconds, you will have a response. Now, it is within 20 seconds 90% of the time, but that's still pretty remarkable. It gives you a lot of information. It will give you effective and termination dates that are in the payer system. It will give you benefits. So if you have a particular office function like maternity, you can send a maternity code, and it will send you inpatient maternity, what the office visits are for your primary care provider, all the diagnostic benefits that you're going to need. If you do a type of service that applies to visit limits, it can send you how many of those visits have been used up until that point in the accumulator. So if there's coordination of benefits information in the payer system, you have to remember payers can be fined for not processing COB according to what the state rules, who's primary and secondary. So payers are very good about identifying coordination of benefit situations, and so they will send you back what's in their system, so what the policy ID is and who the carrier is. There's just a lot of information that you can get back, and it's very quick. You can also send this in a batch transaction. So if you send a batch, that means you can send multiple people at one time. So we see this a lot with offices who will send it for the people that are coming in the next day. So they can identify before the patient even comes into the office if their insurance is still valid. So that helps the front office staff if, they have an ID card that's 10 years old and hasn't been active for 9 of those years, you can identify that before the patient is even seen. So it's a remarkable transaction, and everyone should use it. Now, unfortunately, we live in the real world, and we do know that this is kind of a moving target. Eligibility and terminations can and often are backdated, so you do just kind of have to do your best due diligence. But one thing to be aware of is I know a lot of payers, if you have proof that you had received the fact that they were eligible, they may process that claim still. So that may be worth looking into. Maybe screenshot your 270s or save them somewhere if you're using that, or if you're calling, just notate who you're speaking with. I apologize, I forgot to go on Do Not Disturb. Let me do that really quickly. I'm so sorry. All right, here we go. So I lost my train of thought here, but we are aware that that can be an issue. Just try and cover your tracks a little bit. Please remember to submit the correct ID to the correct payer. We see often a lot of these rejections happen because we can tell we're getting a different payer's subscriber ID in, not our own. So just double check that. All right, the third most common edit is a duplicate claim. So if the exact same claim is sent within, and most payers do a 90-day time frame, then that will get this rejection. So one thing that you can do to help prevent this is utilize the 276. A lot of times, this is a claim status request, and it is very underutilized. So a lot of times the reason people are sending these claims is because they sent a claim and they didn't hear back for some reason. And a lot of times, in my experience, that's because the claim was front-end rejected on the 277CA, and so it needed some form of intervention. And so if you just send another one, now you're going to get a duplicate, and it's going to make it harder to tell why that first claim why you didn't hear back on it. So the 276 will tell you where that claim is, if it's still pending, if they've requested additional information from your office. If the claim has been processed and completed, it will give you the check reference for the electronic remittance advice or the paper remittance advice for where that information can be found, as well as the payment information if there was any. So it is a pretty great transaction, and just like the 270, it can be sent real-time or batch. So if it's sent real-time, you will have a response within 20 seconds, and I would recommend looking into that as well. You can also use the payer's portal or their customer service number to find out where that claim is. Some payers' portals are better than others, and some customer service lines are better than others. So you know those and know what is the best way to contact a provider. I don't love this because it's not a single solution for all your payers. I know you're working with a lot of different payers, and I don't love the idea of you having to go out to 20 different portals or 20 different customer service lines to do this kind of work. It's very time consuming for you, whereas the 276 is automated and it knows exactly where to go. So look into that. And then if you did mean to send a corrected claim, just be sure to change whatever it was that you meant to change on the claim before you send it. So add that line or remove a line, add the modifier, change the provider of service, whatever it is that you need to do. And then just be sure to flag it as a correction in your software. You can reach out to your vendor if you're not sure how to flag it as a corrected claim. Number 4 is the claim or encounter is not found, and this is most common with Medicaid. If your NPI and tax ID are not in a payer system, they may reject that back to you. So you need to double check and make sure that your NPIs and tax IDs are correct. I know, broken record. And then if all else fails, reach out to the payer where you're getting this rejection and make sure that you are in their adjudication system and see if there's something that you need to correct on your end. This is really common in a lot of Medicaid. I know Melina has a lot of issues with these types of issues where the tax ID doesn't match or maybe the NPI isn't in their system. So make sure that you're in the system before you start sending claims. And last but not least, we need to get to that member to be able to process your claim. So the patient or subscriber not being found due to name, date of birth, or ID number. So I've provided some real-life examples that I've redacted for you. So select health offer ID, start with an 8, unless it's a Medicaid ID, in which case it would start with a 0. And here we see that they submitted a subscriber ID that started with a 6, so we're not going to be able to find that in our system. The second example I have is a typo in the date of birth. So here we can see that we have a date of birth of 3/20, and no one on this policy has that date of birth, so we're not going to be able to find a successful match. Here's where we have a typo in the name where the name differs from what the payer has in their adjudication system. So this example, we actually have a few issues. We got the claim from the provider, and the first name was Jackie, and it looks like we probably have Jacqueline in our system. And then we have a date of birth that was submitted 5/6, and you can see that what we have in our system is 5/5, so those don't match. A few issues there. Names can be difficult because if the payer has the incorrect name, depending on how they get their insurance, if it's through an employer, they have to go through their employer to change that. And the reason for this is that most employers send an electronic file stating who their employees are that have the benefits. And so if we change it in our system and then the next month we get the file from the employer, it's just going to revert back. That'd be the same for the exchange. If a member is getting their insurance coverage through the exchange, they need to go through that process to change it. So sometimes it's just easier to use whatever the payer has in their system. We see a lot of issues with twins or when the child is named after the parent. So dad is Henry Sr. and son is Henry Jr. In those instances, date of birth is critical to make sure that we are selecting the right patient. And with twins, that can be an issue as well. I actually have twins on my street, and the first 5 digits of their name or the letters of their name are the exact same. So you can imagine how difficult that can be. So if you are having a hard time getting a claim through in one of those situations, I recommend calling the payer, and they can usually help you determine how to get that claim processed successfully. Just remember, double check your subscriber IDs and make sure you're sending it to the correct payer. And watch for those twin and same name as parent issues. All right. So we're hang tight, guys. We're getting close, I promise. Just trying to wake you up. I know it's a little dry. We've got to find entertainment where we can. So the last section of my presentation is going to go over the UHIN rejections, the most common rejections that they provide in their 999s. So the first 3 issues we've already discussed. It would be missing a required segment, so that could be missing a diagnosis code, no patient address is sent, there are no service lines like we discussed earlier, or the tax ID is missing. There's an invalid ICD-10 code, so it could be that there's a typo or it's too general and lacking specificity. Remember that they don't use date of service in checking those diagnosis codes. And then the ICD-9 issues, sending ICD-9 for a date of service that's October 1st of 2015 or later, or you're trying to get around it by billing an ICD-9 code with a 10 qualifier, and that's not going to work for most instances, so don't try that. Number 4 would be a COB claim doesn't balance. And I have tried so hard to get away from COB, but for some reason it just keeps rearing its ugly head, probably because it feels almost impossible to deal with. This was actually my first ever UHIN presentation was on COB. So we're going to talk about it briefly. Just remember, the total billed amount needs to equal what any previous payers have paid plus the adjustment amounts. If that isn't the case, the claim isn't in balance. I have seen ERAs that have been sent to a provider from the primary that don't balance. That means the primary insurance didn't process it correctly. They're going to have to re-adjudicate that and send a correction before anyone down the line is going to accept that. So check this every step of the way, make sure the claim is in balance. And then one thing I wanted to remind you of is that payers are going to consider the allowed amount to be any paid amounts plus patient responsibility. The reason that's so important is several years ago, UHIN created a law that said if there's a member has 3 insurances, the lesser of the allows is considered payment in full. So if one insurance allows 100, one allows 80, and one allows 60, they consider $60 payment in full. So you really want to make sure that they are considering as much as possible, and if you drop a PR or a paid amount, you're basically reducing how much you're going to get paid. A lot of insurance companies, I know Regents, ignores PI amounts. So one thing I recommend that you do is if you ever get a PI, that's a payer-initiated adjustment. This is usually sent when you don't have a contract with that insurance company, but they want you to write it off. They just don't have a contract to enforce it, so they might send that amount in a PI. And when you send that on to the next insurance, what you need to do is change it to a CO, so saying we're writing it off, or a PR saying we are going to hold the patient responsible for this. And honestly, I would send all PI amounts on as PRs just to have them considered. At the end of everything, you may still choose to write it off for your patient, but that way you have the insurances at least considering those dollars. So if you have questions on COB, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. Another time that a lot of issues with COB are because the adjustment reasons are missing or they're invalid. So for example, if we get a contractual obligation write-off of deductible, that doesn't make any sense. No one requires you to write off deductible amounts. So just make sure that those codes, those claim status codes match what the reason is. And make sure that you're sending on that date the primary or secondary insurance process the claim, and it should be in that year, month, day format. All right. The last one is conditional requirements are missing. So this could be a referring provider is sent without an NPI. For a referring provider, all you're allowed to send is the name and the NPI. So if you're missing half of that, you're making it very difficult for us to identify that referring provider. So please send all that information. The contact name is being sent, but no contact number. They're both required. One is there. And then a missing subscriber ID. Obviously, no payer is going to be able to identify your patient without a subscriber ID. So make sure that's there. And then another common edit is that COB adjustment reasons are sent with no dollars. So here we have a patient responsibility of deductible with a 0. So that shouldn't be sent at all. That could be a software issue you're having. Or in this example, we have a contractual obligation due to your contract and no dollars were sent at all. So those are both examples of bad EDI, and those need to be corrected. I would work with your software vendor. So talk to them. Like I said, you're going to be on a first-name basis with them. And then there are a few that were in addition for institutional claim types. So these are things that would typically be billed on a UB. So trailing blank spaces. So here we have an address with a space at the end, or even worse, it's sent with the segment being complete and then there's a trailing space at the end of that. Those are impossible to see, and this would be on the back end and you wouldn't even know about it. So you'd have to work with your software vendor. They should be able to strip trailing spaces because it's almost impossible to prevent these in a free-form field like an address. So make sure that they're trimming those before they send them on, and that's a back-end function. Or another issue is invalid dates and times being sent. So I've kind of provided some examples of how those should be coming across in the back end. So here's a date-time format. You can see we have our year, month, day, and then the time is in a 24-hour time. So this would be noon 42, 1242. And then just the date would be the same, but without those last 4 characters. Just the time here, we can see we have our 4 characters in military time. And then a date range would look like this. So if you're having issues with dates, it's most likely back-end issues that your software vendor should be able to help you solve. All right. Okay, guys, I have one last little thing we're going to take it home with.
I spilled a little grape juice on the rug.
Listen very carefully. There are some cleaning supplies in the hall closet. They're arranged alphabetically, then by height, then by date of purchase. Find the rug cleaner, then find a scouring pad, then find some distilled water, Julie, distilled water. Hold on a second, there's another call.
Sorry, I love Monk, but I'm hoping that we were able to try and get all the grape juice out of your claims. So with that, that ends my presentation. I hope that you found some use in it, and I really appreciate you guys sacrificing your valuable time to join us. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Julie to see if we have any questions that I need to answer.
Okay, yeah, we do have a few questions. The first question, Kirsten, is where do you utilize the 270?
Yes, so it's going to depend on your software vendor. Usually they have an arrangement with a clearinghouse to provide that through their software. So I would start there. If they don't have a solution that you like or it's too expensive, sometimes they do charge quite a bit for that transaction. You could reach out to other vendors. I know UHIN has a standalone 270 solution that might be beneficial to you. So that's where I would start.
Thank you. On the next question, it says, on the 270, will the response always pick up the benefits for mental health services apart from regular benefits, even if the payer is using a carve-out company to cover mental health claims for them?
That is an excellent question, and my answer is going to be it depends. So the first one is if the payer has the benefits themselves, if they provide them, then of course those are going to come back to you because they're in their system. Now, if they are aware of who the carve-out is through and the employer has provided that information to them and they have it in their system, then they will be able to send that back out to you. So they should be able to tell you who the company is and give you the contact information for them. Unfortunately, there are some employers who will negotiate those contracts outside of working with the payer. And so in those instances, if they haven't provided that information to the payer, you are not going to get that back on the 270. There are quite a few things that could fall into that. In addition to mental health, we see this is pretty common for vision. Vision is often carved out, and chiropractic is another one. So if you're one of those providers, I would try it and see how useful it is to you, but those are some known issues moving forward. And I think it would be great to get to a point where we are able to access that information regardless if it's been benefited, but we're probably going to have to legislate for that.
Okay, the next question is how and where do you flag a correction?
So since I am not sure, I don't work with the software, I only work with my payer software, I wouldn't be able to answer that directly for you. But if you reach out to your software vendor, they should be able to help you know where that information is found.
Okay, there are a couple questions that are specifically regarding Select Health. The first one is which, after you have submitted the claim and you have sent over the W-9, how does Select Health pay? Do they send a paper check or an electronic deposit?
That is going to be completely dependent on how you've been set up in our system. So if you have enrolled for electronic remittance advices or 835s, then you are eligible to get EFT payments. So if you send that information and get enrolled, you will get it via EFT. Otherwise, you will get a paper check and a paper remittance advice. And if you would like to sign up, if you would like to sign up for EFTs and ERAs, you can reach out to us at 801-442-5442. That's our EDI team, and we can direct you, or you can go through the website and there is an enrollment form.
Great. Okay, and the last question is regarding Select Health as well. I sent over a claim last week, but Select Health still needed the W-9. Do I still need to resubmit those claims?
With Select Health, we actually keep those claims in a queue to work for once we have the W-9. So once that has been updated, we will release those claims for payment, and you will not need to resubmit those. That could be different with other payers, but that is how Select Health handles them.
Perfect. Thank you, Kirsten, and thank you for doing this presentation for us today. We'll go ahead and close the conference or the meeting and look forward to working with you again.
Thank you.